A little while ago, Alpha Model released a Ferrari GTC4 Lusso T. They asked me if I wanted to build it for you guys, which of course I answered to with a yes. So let's jump into the box, show all the parts, and go into a bit more detail later on. So as usual with these Alpha Model kits, the parts come in a lot of small bags and there's a lot of them. Now I'm going to go over all of the parts, or at least most of them, but I won't be talking through it as much as most of the parts have the same amount of details and they are made out of the same material. So I'd rather just spare that for the build series itself and just go into detail on that video series. So as you can see, most of the interior parts come separate, and then you also have this big part for the main interior tub itself. The rear seats are molded in, so is the parcel shelf and the details for the door cards on the rear part of this interior. The center part is molded in one piece as well. Not a big deal, as that can all be carpeted out with some flocking. And of course, to detail that center console out even more, there is one part that needs to be in the leather color, or leather colors. There are multiple separate parts and pieces to add additional details on top of this, which we'll pass by later in this video. And I have no idea what this piece is for, but that will become clear during the build, I'm guessing. The main dashboard is also molded in a bigger piece with a lot of the separate details molded in, and the additional details will be added to it later. And the seats for the front come molded in two pieces, the back half of course, and then the lower portion as well. The additional detailing parts that are made out of resin for the interior, and also some of the parts for the chassis, come in this separate smaller bag. And even some of the body components like the rearview mirrors. Some parts to mount the wheels and the calipers to. The two front and one of the rear calipers as well. Again, nicely detailed and also nice and big, as that fills up the wheel nicely with those carbon ceramic brakes. A couple of the additional parts for in the interior, like the door handles and I think the armrest and rear view mirror. A little part for under the front bumper, I'm guessing a splitter of some sort. And the resin piece for the disc brakes, you add some photo etch on top of it to make it actually look like the disc brakes. Some more components for the center console, a grip or a hold for the center console as well, and even the sun visors to detail out the headliner. Some of the vents for on the side, on the exterior of course. The steering wheel, which is nicely detailed and really looks the part. I'm guessing these are the exhausts. They even have some detail on the inside. And then there is a lot of these vents for on the interior. And then finally also the spoiler for on the rear section of the car. There of course are 4 tires as well. These have some nice thread pattern in it and a lot of flashing. That is some excess material that slipped through the mold halves, but that is easily removed, not a big deal. And with this kit you also get the option of 2 wheels. Now I will be going for this set as I really like the look of it, and these look a bit plain and not really suited for the build itself, although it is a nice option to have. Then there is also one big piece for the main chassis itself. It's not really that detailed, but again, I'm not really that bothered by it, as I'm not going to be turning this model around, and it's mainly just going to be for display purposes, so I care about the exterior and having some details visible for the interior. It is a lot thicker than it used to be, so this one is actually flat. Then there is also a small part for the front, with the radiator in it and a bit of molded detail as well. And then of course also some vents for on the underside. And in order to mount that all to the body, there are a lot of screws to help you out with that. And then the final piece for that chassis is the rear part, which mounts on the underside of the bumper. It has a lot of detail for on the underside and also just looks really cool from the rear. As far as the clear parts go, there are multiple options. You get the option for some of the vacuum formed parts, like the lenses for on the front, which are formed to shape and you still need to cut them out. Then in this bigger sheet you also get some pre-painted parts for the sides, the front and the rear, and even have the optional parts for the headlights. Now I'm not really sure which of the 2 options I will be using for the headlights, but it's nice to have both if you screw one of them up. And there is the resin parts as well. These are for the taillights, and these of course still needed to be painted. They are not really that nicely done. They still have a lot of the bubbles in them, but overall with a lick of clear paint, they look totally fine. For some of the smaller and additional details, you get the option for a couple of decals and some metal transfer decals. These are not really decals, just more 3D metal stickers, and they look really like metal, because I'm pretty much sure they actually are, but I'm not absolutely sure. If you do know what these are made of, I'm really curious, so feel free to let me know down in the comments below. For some of the other more realistic details that needed a bit more color, and some of the instruments and harder to do details with paint, there are a nice sheet of decals as well. For any of the details that weren't captured in either the decal sheet itself or in the actual parts, there are multiple parts and sheets of photo etch. There are some with a couple of the exterior details and some grills for on the interior, even the wipers, some other mesh, and some parts for the radiator. Then there is another smaller one with a couple of the logos, badges, and smaller buttons, and even the buckles for the seatbelts. The grille is made out of a thicker piece of photo etch, which makes it a lot sturdier, and also out of multiple parts, so that's a nice puzzle to put together as well. Then you have a couple more of the grills and some of the interior details. And then there is the biggest one of all. It has some of the window frames, which I'm probably not going to be using, as that is already painted on the clear parts themselves. A lot of parts for the detailing of the disc brakes, and even more of that. A couple of more plates for on the interior, even some of the pedals, and some additional metal plates for the rear view mirror, and some other details all around. And then of course there is the final piece, which is most importantly the body. It is molded mostly in one. As you could see earlier, the grills or the slats for the side are separate, which gives you the option to either paint them or have them in carbon fiber really easily. And that rear spoiler piece was also a separate part. There is a bit of flashing on the inside, and not a big deal as it easily just falls off, as you can see right here. And then there are of course a lot of panel lines all around. These are not really as deep as I would like them to be and need a bit of attention. Not that great for a kit of this price, but although it gives you a nice challenge. All the other shapes on the body seem to be really nicely replicated, so those panel lines aren't really that big of a letdown. There are a couple of details here on the front as well in order to help mount the grille, some of the other internal parts for some of the routing of the air of course, and then you have some of the headliner pieces molded in as well. Those sun visors were molded separately, and also a couple of the details for the buttons are molded separately as well, or come in that photo etch sheet. Now the body isn't perfect, as I mentioned before, some of the panel lines are better than others. This one is pretty good, and then some around here are on a couple of areas mostly non-existent or filled up half the way, and there are a couple of bubbles in the body as well. Now, not that big of a deal, as these kits themselves are supposed to be a challenge. They are a bit more expensive, but that more has to do with all of the licensing and the limited production run, and these resin kits are simply just not as easy to make as the big plastic molded ones.